Here are 10 lesser-known facts about Moses, starting with a surprising request he made to God. Moses once asked God to erase his name from the Book of Life during a critical moment, the Israelites' worship of the golden calf. This incident highlights human nature's propensity to deviate from commitments, especially spiritual ones. It's quite ironic that while Moses was atop Mount Sinai, receiving the sacred 10 Commandments directly from God, the Israelites were at the base of the same mountain, openly defying the very first of these commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Their impatience for Moses' return led them to create a tangible deity to see and worship. In their desperation, they gathered their gold jewelry to craft an idol, a golden calf. Aaron, coerced by the people into taking over Moses' role as their spiritual leader, facilitated the creation of this idol, directly contradicting God's laws. The situation quickly degenerated into reckless festivities around the idol, including excessive eating, drinking, and revelry. Observing this, the Lord urgently commanded Moses to return to his people, who had swiftly abandoned the path he had set for them, corrupting themselves in the process. As Moses descended from the mountain, bearing the 2 stone tablets of the covenant, he encountered Joshua and approached the Israelites during their decadent, idolatrous celebration. Filled with justifiable outrage, he shattered the stone tablets as a powerful symbol of the people's betrayal. Exodus 32:31-34. Moses then approached God, lamenting, "These people have committed a grave sin by crafting golden idols for themselves. Yet I beg you to forgive their transgressions. If you choose not to forgive, I ask that you erase my name from the record you maintain." God responded, "I will erase from my record anyone who has sinned against me. Proceed, lead the people to the place I have promised, where my angel will guide you. When the time comes for me to enact justice, I will indeed hold them accountable for their sins." Despite the grave nature of their wrongdoing, Moses sought pardon for them, appealing to God's compassion and generosity. He implored God to absolve Israel, willing to take their punishment upon himself if forgiveness was withheld. Moses believed the sin of the Israelites was so severe that neither the blood of any god nor an animal could atone for it. Only the sacrifice of a man could suffice. Moses was prepared to be erased from God's ledger if it meant the redemption of his people. God rejected Moses' offer, but this perhaps foreshadowed the arrival of a greater figure who would ultimately sacrifice himself for complete redemption, Jesus, who gave his life to atone for our sins. God chose to preserve the nation while maintaining the authority to judge individual transgressors. Now, therefore, proceed and lead the people to the location I have previously mentioned to you. This was God's commitment to stay true to Israel and maintain his presence among them. Next, we turn to Moses and the idol called Nehushtan. The historical books of Kings and the Book of Numbers describe an image of a serpent wrapped around a pole known as Nehushtan. After their escape from Egypt, the Israelites voiced their dissatisfaction with their circumstances to God. As a consequence, God sent venomous snakes among them, resulting in numerous deaths. Upon Moses' intercession, God instructed that a bronze serpent be erected on a pole. Anyone who looked upon this bronze serpent would be cured of their snakebite. Over time, the Israelites began to venerate the bronze serpent. This idol, referenced from Moses' era to King Hezekiah's time, eventually became associated with Hezekiah's religious reforms. However, the worship of Nehushtan likely started well before Hezekiah's reign, as indicated in 2 Kings 18:4. Hezekiah took strong actions against idol worship by tearing down altars, smashing sacred stones, and cutting down Asherah poles. He even destroyed the bronze serpent, called Nehushtan, which Moses had made. The Israelites had been worshiping it and burning incense to it as if it were holy. The bronze serpent was originally a tool from God for healing during a specific event in the Book of Numbers. However, God never said it should be worshipped after that. What was once a miraculous help had turned into an idol, which went against God's commands. The name Nehushtan, meaning a piece of bronze, was likely chosen by Hezekiah to show that it was just a metal object without any real power. It was God who had healed the people, not the bronze serpent. This situation reminds us that even good things or important people can become idols if we're not careful. Our worship and thanks should be given only to God, because nothing else deserves that level of devotion. Regarding why God considered ending Moses' life during the burning bush encounter, the scripture shows an important moment. God had chosen Moses to lead the Israelites out of Egypt to the Promised Land. Known as the lawgiver and mediator of the Old Covenant, Moses was approached by God at the burning bush to take on this role. This was a key part of Moses' journey, highlighting his mission and the serious responsibility of his divine role. The Lord assured Moses that he would rescue his people from Egypt and bring them to a prosperous land, Canaan. After 40 years in Midian, Moses, obeying God's directive, returned to Egypt accompanied by his wife and sons, Zipporah, Gershom, and Eleazar. However, before Moses could fulfill his mission, he had to demonstrate his own obedience. He neglected to circumcise one of his sons, possibly due to resistance from Zipporah, Exodus 4:24-26. During a night at their camp, the Lord confronted Moses and was ready to kill him for this oversight. In response, Zipporah quickly used a flint to circumcise their son, tossing the foreskin at Moses' feet, exclaiming, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." This act appeased the Lord, who then spared Moses. Zipporah referred to Moses as a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision incident. God was on the verge of punishing Moses severely for his failure. The specifics of Moses' mistake are not explicitly detailed in Exodus 4:24-26, but the context hints that the essential ritual of circumcision, a sign of God's covenant with his chosen, was overlooked by Moses. This oversight might have stemmed from the influence of his Midianite family, especially Zipporah, who evidently opposed circumcision, possibly influencing Moses against it. Her reaction suggests that she believed her actions, though severe, had saved her husband's life. Moses had disregarded God's command, but this incident underscores that God chooses to work through those who are dedicated and faultless. You and I understand that we are neither holy nor blameless by our own merit. We are justified solely through Christ. Yet, this knowledge does not give us license to continue sinning to extend God's grace. Moses was preparing to represent God, yet he had neglected essential duties expected of a righteous leader, particularly in his familial responsibilities. This oversight prompted God to consider eliminating Moses, a stark reminder of his severity and a signal that he demands serious commitment. As Moses was set to deliver the Israelites, he needed to address discrepancies in his conduct, since God requires holiness from those he appoints to lead. This high standard of judgment applies not only to Moses, but also to the Israelites, illustrating that God will not enlist an unjust people to judge others. Moses' unresolved issues rendered him unfit for spiritual leadership. These issues needed addressing before he could successfully execute his mission. After Zipporah performed the circumcision, the Lord relented. Essentially, God was prepared to end Moses' life because he was on the verge of teaching God's laws to the Israelites while violating them himself. Moreover, Moses was later prohibited from entering the Promised Land due to this and other transgressions. The consequences God imposes can sometimes seem disproportionate to the offense. For instance, Moses' act of striking a rock to extract water for the complaining Israelites at Meribah does not intuitively seem to justify barring him from the Promised Land. Despite his central role in leading Israel through major events such as the escape from Egypt, the delivery of the Ten Commandments, and numerous victories over their enemies, this single act at Meribah marked him as unworthy to enter the land promised to Israel. The relentless complaints from the Israelites about their thirst and their testing of God led to this moment. Overwhelmed by the people's discontent, Moses sought guidance from God, who instructed him to proceed with the elders of Israel, take the staff with which he had struck the Nile, and strike the rock at Horeb, God assured him that water would flow from the rock to quench the people's thirst. Moses performed this act before the Israelite elders, Exodus 17:4-6, with water gushing from the rock to quench the thirst of the people. Essentially, the Israelites brought a problem to Moses. He sought divine guidance, and upon following God's precise instructions, water flowed. Now consider what occurred during the second incident at Meribah, which involved Moses' frustration leading to disobedience. This second miraculous event is recorded in Numbers 20. The Israelites reached the desert of Zin, near Kadesh, in the first month of the 40th year after their departure from Egypt. During their stay in Kadesh, where Miriam passed away and was buried, the congregation faced a severe water shortage, prompting them to confront Moses and Aaron. The people lamented, wishing they had perished with their brethren previously struck down by the Lord. Their complaints were bitter. "Why have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness to die? We and our cattle. Why did you lead us out of Egypt to this wretched place?" They described it as a land devoid of grains, figs, vines, or pomegranates, and critically, without water. In response, Moses and Aaron withdrew from the gathering to the tent of meeting and prostrated themselves in prayer. During this solemn moment, the Lord's glory appeared, offering specific instructions to Moses. He was told to take the rod, assemble the congregation with Aaron, and speak to the rock in their presence so that it would release water. Accordingly, you are to extract water from the rock to provide for the people and their livestock. Moses retrieved the staff from the presence of the Lord, following his instructions, and together with Aaron, he called the community to gather around the rock. Moses addressed the crowd, saying, "Hear me, you rebels, do we have to fetch water for you from this rock?" With that, Moses raised his arm and, using the staff, struck the rock twice, which was contrary to the Lord's command to merely speak to it. Water gushed forth generously, and both the people and their animals quenched their thirst. However, the Lord reprimanded Moses and Aaron, saying, "Because you lacked faith in me, failing to uphold my sanctity before the Israelites, you will not lead this congregation into the land I have promised them." This place was named Meribah, where the Israelites disputed with the Lord, yet through this, he demonstrated his holiness among them. Moses felt overwhelmed by the demands of the people. Was this oversight by God dismissed? The Israelites continually tested God and questioned Moses' leadership. At a glance, it appears that Moses is severely punished by God. Yet until now, Moses had adhered to God's directives. Couldn't God have overlooked this one transgression? Was this judgment too severe? It's important to recognize that the initial striking of the rock foreshadows Christ. As stated in 1 Corinthians 10:1-5, I want you to know, brothers, that our ancestors were all under the cloud, all crossed the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food and drank the same spiritual drink. For they drank from the spiritual rock that accompanied them, and that rock was Christ. Despite the fact that many followed him, God was displeased with the majority as they perished in the wilderness. Moses, following God's command in Exodus 17, struck the rock, but it is often taught that he was punished in Numbers 20 for striking it twice instead of once as initially instructed. 1 Corinthians interprets the rock in the wilderness as a symbol of Jesus Christ, God's Son. In Exodus 17, God commanded Moses to strike the rock to prefigure Christ as our Redeemer. Christ, our cornerstone, was struck for us, promising to release streams of living water, a motif echoed throughout Psalms and Isaiah. The book of Hebrews explains that Christ's death was a singular, sufficient sacrifice for all sins, negating any need for repetition. Thus, the act in Exodus 17 where Moses was to strike the rock once was meant to symbolize the single sacrifice of Jesus for our redemption. However, in Numbers 20, God instructed Moses to merely speak to the rock, preserving the symbolism established in Exodus 17. Moses' decision to strike the rock a second time altered the intended symbolism, suggesting erroneously that Christ might need to be sacrificed repeatedly. To prevent this misconception and maintain the integrity of the symbol, God disciplined Moses by denying him entry into the Promised Land. This discipline also served to illustrate a greater spiritual truth about salvation. It showed that salvation is not attained through adherence to the law, represented by Moses, but through faith in Jesus Christ, foreshadowed by Joshua, whose name translates to Jesus. This was further highlighted when Moses, instead of speaking to the rock as commanded, struck it in frustration and was barred from leading his people into the Promised Land. This act of disobedience, marked by anger rather than trust, reinforced that entry into God's promised salvation requires faith, not works. Number 5 focuses on the magicians Moses encountered, namely Jannes and Jambres. In the biblical account from Exodus 7 and 8, Moses and Aaron stand before Pharaoh in Egypt, advocating for the release of the Israelites from slavery. This event marks a critical moment where Moses and Aaron display divine powers through miraculous acts, establishing Moses as one of the most powerful and revered figures in biblical history. Scripture notes the extraordinary might and awe-inspiring feats that Moses accomplished, highlighting that no prophet in Israel ever matched his prowess until the coming of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Moses was not only a leader, but also served as a prophet, priest, and a symbol of deliverance, embodying roles that would later be fulfilled by Christ in a singularly majestic fashion. Despite the awe these miracles inspired, Moses faced significant challenges, particularly from the Egyptian magicians Jannes and Jambres. During Moses and Aaron's initial confrontation with Pharaoh, they were commanded by God to demonstrate a sign of divine authority. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh, which miraculously transformed into a serpent. Pharaoh, skeptical and intrigued, summoned his magicians, who replicated the miracle by turning their staffs into serpents as well. However, in a dramatic display of superiority, Aaron's serpent swallowed up the magician's serpents. This act served not only as a sign of God's power, but also as a portentous omen to the Egyptian court. The Lord instructed Moses and Aaron to use this miracle as a definitive proof of their divine commission when challenged by Pharaoh to validate their claims. This confrontation underscored the divine support backing Moses and Aaron, setting the stage for the eventual liberation of the Israelites. Moses and Aaron followed God's instructions precisely when they approached Pharaoh. Aaron cast his staff down before Pharaoh and his courtiers, and it transformed into a serpent. In response, Pharaoh summoned his own magicians, wise men skilled in the arcane and sorcery. Utilizing their mystical arts, these Egyptian priests replicated the feat, each converting their staff into a serpent. However, the serpent from Aaron's staff demonstrated its supremacy by consuming the others. Despite this clear display of power, Pharaoh remained obstinate and ignored their warnings, exactly as God had foretold. Pharaoh's magicians managed to mimic the signs performed by Moses and Aaron on 2 additional occasions. The initial plague, as Moses inflicted, was the plague of blood. Like Moses, who turned the waters of the Nile into blood, the magicians duplicated this effect using their enchantments. Exodus 7:19-22, Plague of Blood. Following God's command, Moses instructed Aaron to stretch his staff over the waters of Egypt, its rivers, canals, ponds, and all reservoirs, transforming them into blood. The entire water supply of Egypt was afflicted, killing the fish and causing the Nile to emit a foul odor, making the water undrinkable. Mirroring this, the magicians employed their mystical arts to achieve the same result. Despite their success in replicating the miracle, Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding, and he disregarded their efforts as God had predicted. Ironically, the magicians' decision to turn more water into blood, rather than attempting to reverse the calamity, only deepened the crisis. Their actions, intended to display power, instead highlighted their folly by exacerbating the suffering inflicted by the plagues, serving to confirm the divine origin and superior might of Moses and Aaron's miracles. They further contributed to their people's woes. This exemplifies the nature of the dark arts. Their goal was not to ease the hardships of the Egyptians, but rather to boost their own significance, not focusing on aiding those they led. Their approach was irrational, and regrettably, they offered no assistance to their own people. The second calamity to befall the Egyptians was an infestation of frogs. Instead of resolving this issue, the magicians compounded the problem by summoning more frogs, exacerbating the crisis. Subsequently, the magicians' influence waned, as they were unable to replicate further plagues and conceded that they were observing the divine hand of God through Moses' signs, Exodus 8:19. They informed Pharaoh, "This is indeed the divine hand of God." Despite this, Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding, and he ignored their counsel as the Lord had predicted. Pharaoh's magicians, empowered by Satan, had managed to mimic some of the miracles God had enacted through Moses and Aaron. One might wonder how these Egyptian sorcerers managed such feats. Although Satan, once a high-ranking angel in God's service, possesses the ability to deceive, mimic miracles, and foretell events with some accuracy, his powers pale in comparison to God's. Ultimately, God's omnipotence prevailed over the Egyptian sorcerers, who failed to summon lice. God's power is so immense that it effortlessly surpasses any force Satan can muster. The end times will be marked by dark powers performing wonders and people accepting these as genuine. Much like the limited powers of Janus and Jambres, Satan's influence has its bounds. Yet even in the end times, God maintains supreme control. There is victorious hope in Jesus. While miracles may demonstrate the supernatural, they do not necessarily attest to truth. The Egyptian magicians, though scholarly and knowledgeable, lacked the divine wisdom that Paul noted was crucial. Many people are easily captivated by any form of spiritual power, often without considering whether its origin is nefarious or divine. It's crucial to remain vigilant, as even powers that seem to provide sought-after answers might be misleading, with demonic entities masquerading as agents of light. Notably, there's only one individual whom God himself laid to rest. The details surrounding Moses' death are shrouded in mystery, as God chose not to disclose the circumstances. Moses climbed from the plains of Moab to the summit of Mount Nebo, specifically the peak of Pisgah, across from Jericho. There, the Lord revealed to him the vast expanse of the land stretching from Gilead to Dan, encompassing all of Naphtali, the territories of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the way to Judah at the Mediterranean Sea, the southern Negev, and the valley plains of Jericho, known as the City of Palm Trees, up to Zoar. Moses earned the distinguished title of Jehovah's servant. Throughout his lifetime, Moses epitomized the essence of servitude, diligently executing his duties because he sought guidance from God, as a servant anticipates his master's commands. He endeavored to live up to the high standards set during his divine encounter on the holy mountain. His dedication to God was unwavering. Moses neither shirked nor overextended in his responsibilities. His reverence for God's name was deep, his commitment to God's mission steadfast, and his trust in God's promises unshakable. Yet despite his status as a devoted servant of God, Moses, like most humans, was destined to die. Only two individuals are exempt from the mortal passage through the river of death to enter the realms of glory, and Moses is not among them. As Moses neared the end of his life, God granted him a vision of the promised land, the very land he had left Egypt to claim. Moses ascended Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab to reach the peak of Pisgah. Like Moses, we all face our own Pisgah to cross, hoping to be reunited with our ancestors. May we approach our journeys with as much readiness as Moses, the devoted servant of God. Moses' death is notably remarkable. The circumstances of his passing are indeed extraordinary. Standing at approximately 1,270 meters, almost a mile high, Mount Pisgah is a formidable climb. It's rare for someone who is 120 years old to scale a nearly mile-high mountain and live to share the experience. Yet Moses accomplished this feat. There was no wide trail to ease his journey, but none was necessary for him. His remarkable ascent is a testament to his enduring vigor. At nearly 120 years old, Moses joyfully climbed to this lofty summit of 1,370 meters. Once atop, he did not wallow in self-pity, despite the solitary grandeur of his situation, gazing out over Canaan below him. Moses was prepared for his end. It was not unexpected. He had known well in advance that he would not enter Canaan. Well aware of his impending departure, this knowledge did not dampen his spirit. It's also worth noting that Moses' death not only reflects the wise mercy of God, but also the abundant grace of his providence. Once Moses accepted that his end was near, he did not protest or pray against his fate. His passing was the perfect conclusion to his life's mission, realizing that he had achieved his purpose. He had been tasked with leading his people through the wilderness, a mission he successfully completed. Furthermore, he passed away in the best circumstances imaginable. While some find it fitting to die surrounded by family, drawing comfort from domestic bonds, Moses' final moments were spent in sublime isolation, fitting for a man whose life was dedicated to serving higher purposes. Moses indeed lived a life devoid of typical familial closeness, dying as decreed by the Lord. What a remarkable existence. Living to the age of 120 without the need for glasses, and a century and a quarter without crutches, Moses certainly didn't spend his days confined to a rocking chair, applying liniment and drinking. Deuteronomy 34:6 highlights one of the most extraordinary aspects of his exceptional life. In the scripture, it is noted, "And he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows his burial place to this day." This passage reflects the unique circumstance of Moses' burial. God himself undertook the task, making Moses the only individual in the Bible to receive such a distinction. The exact location of his grave remains a mystery. The concealment of Moses' grave was intentional. Had it been known, it likely would have become a pilgrimage site. Imagining the scene today, one could picture crowds flocking to Mount Nebo, with vendors selling snacks, guided tours being offered, and perhaps even a tram service to the site, complete with large banners announcing the location of Moses' resting place. This is precisely why the location was hidden. It was of such importance that it even led to a celestial confrontation. In the 8th mention, the devil vied for Moses' body. Jude verse 9 recounts an obscure biblical episode. But Michael the archangel, when he disputed with the devil over the body of Moses, did not presume to bring a slanderous judgment against him, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." This altercation, mentioned only in Jude, raises questions about its origins. The narrative suggests that the story might have been preserved through tradition, though this is not certain. The precise reason for the dispute between Michael and Satan over Moses' body is not detailed, but it's plausible that Satan wished to locate it for the purpose of establishing a shrine, a testament to the enduring intrigue and significance of Moses' legacy. Michael's choice not to pass judgment, but to simply state the Lord's rebuke, underscores his profound humility and absolute obedience to divine authority. This reflects a fundamental aspect of celestial hierarchy. Righteous angels operate under a structured authority and exhibit submission to higher powers. This submission, especially from an archangel as mighty as Michael, highlights a significant spiritual principle. Submission does not diminish one's strength, purpose, or individual worth. Michael's strength was never questioned. Rather, his deference to God showcases the beauty in obedience. Michael's last significant biblical appearance is in Revelation 12:7, during the dramatic expulsion of Satan from heaven. This confrontation, though unpleasant, is essential for correction, purification, and ultimately, the unity of the heavenly community. Moving to number 9, Moses meets Jesus during the Transfiguration. This event, documented in all the Gospel books, stands as a critical moment in Jesus' life and a testament to his divinity. After performing a series of miracles and predicting his death, Jesus takes only 3 of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, to a high mountain. During the Transfiguration, Jesus' appearance dramatically changes. His face shines like the sun, and his clothes turn dazzling white, Matthew 17:2. This event not only signifies the tangible presence of God's kingdom among his people, but also serves as a profound revelation of Jesus' identity and mission to the innermost circle of his disciples. Moses and Elijah appear during this pivotal scene, representing the law and the prophets respectively, which underscores their roles in affirming Jesus as the Messiah who fulfills the prophecies and laws of the Old Testament. While Moses is revered as one of the greatest Jewish leaders, responsible for delivering God's law, and Elijah represents the link between early charismatic prophecy and later prophetic writings, Jesus' presence alongside them signifies his greater mission and authority. This meeting highlights the continuity and culmination of biblical history in the person of Jesus, who transcends the significant legacies of both figures. Moses is esteemed as the quintessential prophet, while Elijah is revered as the herald of the Messiah. As indicated in Malachi 4:4-6, these verses reference both the preservation of the law through God's servant Moses and the promise of sending the prophet Elijah before the formidable day of the Lord. Their appearance alongside Jesus during the Transfiguration underscores the majestic identity of Jesus as the Son of God, surpassing the foundational roles both prophets played. The divine presence that once appeared to Moses on Mount Sinai filled the tabernacle with Shekinah glory, led the Israelites through the wilderness, and filled Solomon's temple, also manifested during pivotal moments in Jesus' ministry. This continuous thread of divine presence highlights that Jesus not only fulfills the roles of lawgiver and prophet, as represented by Moses and Elijah, but also embodies God's ultimate revelation as the incarnate Son. In the scene of the Transfiguration, it becomes clear that Jesus transcends the figures of Moses and Elijah. While they pointed towards a future revelation, Jesus is that revelation, the definitive prophet who not only fulfills Moses' prophecies, but is also the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. The disciples are instructed to listen to him, emphasizing his messianic mission. After the vision, when the disciples look up, they see only Jesus, emphasizing that Moses and Elijah's roles were to prepare for this greater revelation. Despite receiving the clearest revelation of Jesus' divine identity, the disciples still struggle to fully grasp the magnitude of what they have witnessed. Moses' relationship with God is another profound testament to divine intimacy. Moses encountered God in the burning bush, witnessed his power over Pharaoh, saw the parting of the sea, and spent 40 days and nights with him on Mount Sinai. Beyond witnessing miracles and acts of deliverance, Moses' deepest desire was for a personal relationship with God, valuing this above all wonders. To know God personally is described in the Bible as the ultimate blessing, John 17:3, encapsulating the essence of eternal life. God's response to Moses' longing for assurance of his presence reflects a personal and favor-filled relationship. My presence will go with you, showcasing a deep personal bond. This interaction not only highlights Moses' favored status, but also the personal nature of God's relationship with those devoted to him. Despite witnessing monumental events like the burning bush, the parting of the Red Sea, water flowing from a rock, and manna descending from heaven, Moses remained insatiably curious about God. These miraculous events, while awe-inspiring, only fueled his desire for a deeper, more profound understanding of the divine. Moses' request to God, "Please show me your ways that I may know you," reflects a soul deeply yearning for more than just a superficial encounter. He wanted a comprehensive feast of divine knowledge, not merely the appetizers of his previous experiences. This desire mirrors the yearning described in Psalms 42:1-2, where the psalmist compares his longing for God to a deer's thirst for streams of water. Such a profound thirst for divine knowledge and presence is what God seeks in his followers, not mere attendance in religious services, but a deep, personal quest to know him. Moved by this deep desire, Moses made a bold request. "Now show me your glory." Exodus 33:18. He wasn't content with indirect experiences of God's power. He sought a direct revelation of God's glory, a visible manifestation of the divine presence that had thus far been veiled. This narrative sets a poignant question for every believer. Are you content with routine religious practices? Or do you, like Moses, crave a deeper revelation of God's glory in your life? Moses' audacious plea highlights the dynamic nature of his faith, driven not by complacency, but by an insatiable desire to directly encounter the divine. God responded to Moses' request with a plan that balanced revelation with mystery. He promised to make his goodness pass before Moses and to proclaim his name, thus demonstrating his nature and attributes. However, he also set boundaries to this revelation. You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live. Exodus 33:20. This response highlights the paradox of divine intimacy and transcendence. God invites close relationship with his creation while maintaining his ineffable holiness. Ultimately, God's covenantal faithfulness shines through this interaction. His willingness to renew his covenant with Israel and reveal aspects of his glory to Moses encapsulates his merciful and compassionate nature, showing that God not only governs with power, but also engages with profound love and kindness. In this extraordinary narrative, God sets the parameters for Moses' direct encounter with his divine glory, acknowledging human limitations in comprehending the fullness of the divine presence. As described in Exodus 33:21-23, God tells Moses, "There is a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." This arrangement underscores the profound holiness of God and the careful measures he takes to protect Moses while allowing him the closest possible encounter. In this passage, the language of seeing God's back and not his face is symbolic, illustrating the limits of human capacity to fully grasp the divine essence. The imagery of God covering Moses with his hand and then revealing only his back signifies a mediated experience of God's glory, one that is both awe-inspiring yet safeguarded. Even though this encounter was restricted, Moses' face later shone with the radiance of having been in God's presence, reflecting the transformative power of even a glimpse of God's glory. This incident profoundly illustrates the concept that, while no one can see God in his entirety and live, God provides ways for humanity to experience aspects of his glory in a manner they can survive and understand. It points to a God who is both immensely holy and intimately involved with his creation. Moreover, this encounter foreshadows the revelation of God through Jesus Christ. As Jesus would later explain to his disciples, "Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father," John 14:9, indicating that in Jesus, the fullness of God was made accessible and understandable to humanity. Jesus serves as the ultimate revelation of God's character and will, bridging the gap between divine transcendence and human understanding. In conclusion, stories like these encourage us to deepen our faith and seek a closer relationship with God, walking by faith until we can fully comprehend his glory. If you found this content enriching and insightful, I encourage you to subscribe so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. Together, we can continue to illuminate minds and broaden our collective understanding. Thank you for being part of this journey. May God bless you in all your endeavors.